Welcome back, League esports fans, to another episode of the No FFs Podcast, a podcast where we hit it hard, we hit it fast, we find that moment in every game where the FF vote starts flying, and we race right past that. It's been a bit of a delay in between episodes. I don't know if you can tell from my voice, but I have been under the weather, so you can tell if you're watching the YouTube, I haven't shaved, I'm wearing a hoodie, but we're ready to go. Today we have an episode all about the LEC. We haven't visited Europe for a bit, and we're interested. I'm going to dive in. This is mid-split now, just a little bit past mid-split, so everyone's played everyone else at least once, and I'm interested to see where all these 10 teams have ended up. For most of the split, this had been my most predictable region. Things got a little haywire kind of in week 5, but we'll see what happened and see how much of the meta shifts that we've think will come in 9.3 and beyond will affect the rest of the spring split, and where these 10 teams will end up and who might come out on top. Real quick, we're going to set our internet timer to 15 minutes and we're on our way. As always, I'm your host, Xing Li. I'm a writer for .esports. You can follow me on Twitter at XingTheLi. That's XingTheli. And you can also follow the podcast at No FFs Pod. That's NOFFS Pod. That's where I'll be posting everything about this podcast, only the podcast. So if you want to hear my takes on the rest of the league world, definitely follow my main Twitter account and follow the podcast page to know when episodes drop. Give us a subscribe on iTunes, review the show. Love to get your feedback. So let's take a look at the EU standings. There are going to be some jump cuts in here because I'll be sneezing and the cold is just going to wreck this. But we'll do the best that we can. G2 on top, Schalke and Vitality right behind them. Vitality I thought would be good coming into the year. Schalke has surprised me a little bit. We'll talk about them. And then you have Misfits and Fnatic struggling a little bit. Origen, Splice, and SK, those could all pose challenges to the top teams, and we'll see where they end up. We're just going to go through this kind of team by team and look at the strengths and weaknesses that we've seen so far and what we can expect to go forward. What I've really done is I've gone to Oracle's Elixir. This is Tim Sevenhuizen's site where you can find all your league stats. And I've sorted all the teams by early game rating. And the reason I've done that is because this is a very early game focused meta. He wrote that the impact of the early game is much more significant on the outcome of the game than it was last year. Even last year, where it was the fastest meta we've seen in a while in League. So if you go down this list and then you compare it to the LEC standings list, it's pretty similar, right? You have G2, Schalke, Vitality at the top there, G2, Schalke, Vitality at the top here. You see the same kind of ordering. And so we're just going to go and sort each team by early game rating and see where they ended up. Now, G2 is obviously first. G2 has played pretty much like we expected them to. They've won lanes very consistently. They are able to achieve leads even when the jungler's not involved. Jankos has had a very good jungle start for him. He's been greedy sometimes on the likes of Karthus and Olaf, but he's had good starts. He had a good start against Misfits on Elise, and was doing some things against Origen on Lee, and then the mid lane just fell apart there. The one thing I will point out about G2 is Perks' champion pool. We are in a crit ADC meta in 9.3, and Perks, in the 2 games that we saw in 9.3 last week, he played Yasuo versus Misfits, which was very, successful, and then he played Sivir against Origen, and that, everyone remembers the solo kill that Nuke Duck got on Caps, the Zed solo kill, but Perks was actually losing bot lane pretty hard in this game. He took a really interesting back where he bought a long sword very early on Sivir, and Patrick just waited out the lane and came back with Sheen, and it was just a really interesting choice from Perks. I don't know what they had planned for that, but I'm interested to see how he transitions into a crit ADC role. Next on the list, we have Schalke, number 2 in early game rating. This is a team that I thought could have struggled coming in. They didn't form their roster until a little bit later in the off season. They got players like Odo Omne and Abadage, who Odo Omne had a pretty down year last year. Abadage, we didn't know how he'd transition from Turkish league to this league. Both have performed okay, but the real star of the show is Memento. This guy has been absolutely dominant. And the interesting thing is, if you look at the XP differential and the CS differential, this guy is basically giving up his entire jungle to help his lanes. And he's been required to do that, and he's done it successfully. He's propped up all three lanes basically for Schalke throughout the year, and the battles between him and Mowgli, between Schalke and Vitality for that second spot have been really interesting. Memento won the first battle in tempo, and then Mowgli came back in the last game that the two faced off, and he was able to make some outplays and win that matchup. And I think that's one of the more interesting puzzles that we've been able to see in this league so far is Memento versus Mowgli in the jungle. One concern that I really have for Schalke is if you look at mid lane, Abbedagge's mid lane has not been great. Now this guy is a traditional mage player. We are returning to a mage meta, right? So last year he's playing Zoe, Ryze. Those might come back. And so I think things could get better, but there might be a little bit of fool's gold if you're thinking Schalke is definitely going to be in top 4, because I want to see them put the pedal to the metal with Abbedagge in the middle lane. See him play those mages successfully, and when Memento's not saving the day and people are able to figure that out and pressure him out of his jungle, I want to see them be able to react against that. Vitality, they are kind of the opposite story, where Mowgli had a rough start to the year, had that loss against Schalke early on where he was outpathed by Memento, made some mistakes, and he has turned it on big time. Mowgli has been dominant. The one thing I want to point out about him is if you look at the warding stats and the vision stats, this is Korean Jungler 101, man. Number 1 in the league in junglers in wards per minute, and not even close in wards cleared per minute either. He's like Memento. They play similar style, very supportive of his lanes, very good attention to what they want to do with Jizuke in the mid lane, getting him ahead, snowballing him ahead. He's not concerned about his own farm. He's giving up basically his jungle, still keeping up in CS, but definitely not taxing the lane, right? The experience numbers are low because he's not taxing the lanes, and he's a very lane-focused player. Love to see that from Vitality, and if they keep growing and the bot lane has to become more consistent for me, they could challenge G2 eventually for that top spot if they become more consistent. Now, 4th on the list, Voice is going fast. Splice have basically built their entire team around Humanoid. So Abbedagge and Humanoid were the Turkish mid laners that came over to this league. Abbedagge from Supermassive, the traditional Turkish powerhouse, and then Humanoid from Dark Passage. And Humanoid is also another standard mage player, but then if you look at his individual player stats compared to Abbedagge's, and it's night and day. This guy is beasting on the whole lane. Number 1 in the league at XP at 10, number 2 in CS differential at 10, a little bit lower on the gold differential because of turret plates and kills, but this guy is like this year's Jizuke. He's been an absolute beast. I think the mage meta will be just fine for him. He's been very adaptable, and Splice has, they haven't actually done that much for him, because you look at Xerxes champion pool, and he's been playing like the likes of Karthus. He's a madman. He's always experimenting with stuff in the jungle. It doesn't matter what he's around. Humanoid is able to pull through. If we see the likes of Azir come back a little bit, Oriana, this guy is able to pilot mages. I'm really excited to see what Splice do for the rest of the split, because I really think they could be good. The one thing I would watch out for is Kabe doesn't have the best lane. He never has. So he can be pressured a little bit in a crit meta. And then, in the top lane, they've gotten pretty good performances as well out of Vizicachi. Not as good as you've seen in the past, but he's kind of held that down. But I want to see which one of these side lanes can step it up for Humanoid, or if he's just going to do it himself, a la Jizuke and Vitality last year. 5th on the list, SK Gaming. This is a team that I think not many people were expecting to be in the playoffs or up this high. I spoke to their management before the season. I think they had a good plan to bring in the young players from Mad Lions and see how they form together. Again, I really like that idea of bringing in several young players that have played together, that have built synergy, and then slowly supplementing it with pros that have been around for a while, like they did with Purion, right? He gives them that credibility in the mid lane where Purion's just not going to lose lane. He's going to hold his deal. And for me, Selfmade has been a beast. He's gotten a ton of praise on stream. It's very, very well deserved. He's been an absolute monster. You look at the kill participation, very, very high. You look at the first blood percentage, very, very high. He's been running around doing everything. They have pretty good dragon control. They're doing things right? They understand what they want to do. So they have pretty good dragon control as a team. First dragon control, they look at Baron the right way. They're number 2 in first Baron, and number 2 overall in Baron percentage. So they're doing the right things. The one criticism I would have for them is that they need to up these ward numbers. They're second to last in wards per minute, and they're third to last in wards cleared per minute. So as we go into a team fight oriented meta where we might see like more of the traditional front to back team fighting around a crit ADC, I want to see them be able to set up those Baron plays and not have self-made just kind of pull the trigger. And that's what I want to see going into the second half of the year. Their mid-late rating is still a little bit lower than you would like from them. Again, very good results for a team full of young players. Can't be disappointed at all. Next team on the list will be Misfits. Oh boy. So Tim and I, the guy that runs this page, had a conversation about Misfits, because if you look at like gold differential at 10, Misfits are number 2, first turret number 2, first 3 turrets number 4, dragon percentage number 2. So it's like, first dragon percentage number 1, tied for number 1, tied for number 1. So they're not, they're tied with G2, and it's like, if you put all this together, I would have expected this early game rating to be very near the top. Instead, it's 6th. And the reason why is I went through and I looked at the stats, and I found that almost all of their gold differential at 15 is explained by one game, the week 1 victory over SK, where it was Max Lore who picked Nunu, and he just trolled the bot lane, and it snowballed out of control. They got a 10,000 gold lead at 15 minutes in that game. If you look at all their other 9 games combined, their average is negative 1,000. And that's why they're here. We had one great game, and then the rest of it's been slightly below average. And the one player that I want to point out for that is Max Lore. When you look at this team, he's been very, very, he's very, very mid-centric. He's been helping Febiven a lot, and yet they're consistently not able to achieve leads in side lanes. They consistently have issues coordinating plays where he and Febiven aren't on the same page. We've seen times where they greed for kills, or Febiven will not juggle turret aggro, correctly. And then they go in the late game and they throw even harder. And the really interesting thing is they're not giving any resources to the bot lane. They're not really doing anything for Han Sama, who's a good player, but hasn't been as good on this team. Obviously, he hasn't had the resources. And for Misfits, it's kind of everything, like bad drafts, bad coordination, bad side lane control. And for me, it comes down to Max Lore. Max Lore's a player who I think is pretty good. I think he's had some games where you scratch your head, like, why is he picking Karthus? This is kind of a waste of his skills. And why is he 1 and 2 on Lee Sin? And some of his Lee games, he has just no early priority. He's not actually doing much in the early game on Lee, which you would imagine Lee would be one of the strongest duelers, pre-6. So I want to see more out of Misfits Max Lore. I assume the fans want to as well, and he'll be the key for me to turning this season around for them, getting the bot lane involved more, and ultimately becoming a less predictable team. Origen, next on the list. This is a team built around Nuke Duck, and it is, again, the year of the Duck. Obviously grabbed everyone's attention by solo killing Caps and getting that win almost single-handedly versus G2. Nuke Duck and Patrick have been absolute beasts for Origen. I think that could continue. Patrick, he had some pretty disappointing results on H2K last year, but I think he'll be suited for the crit meta just fine. I like what we've seen out of him and Mithy, the growth there. My 2 concerns for Origen going into the second half of the split is 1, Alphari. I want to see more from him. He's basically a range champion at this point. Urgot just got nerfed, which is kind of good for him because he can't play into Urgot either. The bad news is he only is good on Urgot. But what happens if Kennen gets banned? What happens if Jace gets banned? Does he have another champion in his pool? He's always had a non-traditional pool. I want to see more from him. Second thing, warding stats, not good for Origen. Third to last in wards per minute. Fourth from last in wards cleared per minute. And it's pretty easy to see what's going on. If you look at the jungle position, you look at Cold, isn't warding at all. Mithy, same story for him at his position, is one of the worst warders. They're clearing a lot of wards, which I guess is good. But I want to see stronger vision control so that they can walk into those 5v5 team fights with Nuke Duck on the side trying to flank and be able to protect the ADC in the crit meta. Next, we're going to lump these two teams together, Excel and Rogue. So Excel and Rogue both brought in some new players. I'm not exactly sure why Rogue thought it was necessary to bench Prophet. I mean, if you look at his numbers, like, I just don't understand why this guy doesn't get a break. He just can't get good laners around him. They don't have a good solo lane around, mid lane around him with Senkux. And the ADC, I mean, Hiku, I hate to just criticize players, but this is a team that looks like they're just waiting for Forgiven to potentially join up with Vander. I mean, you look at the mid lane situation for both teams. You've got Senkux down here. Exile's not even on the page. And so, they just have no shot without the level of control that they have. And not to just say the Koreans are amazing. Like, they've been cut off from their teams too, right? The junglers aren't involved at all. And this is a situation where it's almost like brought in special, but this might be a time to bring in a replacement for Kadril. We've seen Kadril for a year and a half now. It might be time to bring in another young player to like grow together, do what SK did with Mad Lions. And if you're Rogue, again, the bot lane, bot mid, I think you would get more out of that and having Prophet hold down the fort. I think Prophet and Expect have played really well, and their teams have let them down. The last team we want to talk about, we saved the best for last. It is Fnatic. Broxa gave a really interesting interview to the Shot Caller where he called out a lot of Fnatic's problems with drafts and people not playing what they should have been playing and drafts that were destined to lose. And I agree with him. Some of their drafts are absolutely garbage. They didn't plan for counter picks early. They didn't plan for meta late. But I don't think Broxa himself is, can be entirely ignored, right? You look at my notes on Broxa throughout the weeks. Broxa invisible. Broxa power farming. Cold much better tracking Broxa. If Cold is tracking you, you've got some problems. Nuke Duck outplays gank. Broxa dies. Okay, Nuke Duck gets everyone. Mid pressure restricts Broxa. And then you go on late. In these Fnatic games. Broxa, very aggro, but then they go into this mid 5v5 ARAM versus SK when they have a Kassadin on their team. And it's like, okay, I get it. It's all messed up, right? The drafts are bad, the strategy's bad. But at some point, Broxa, you have to make this team your own and be able to inspire leadership or inspire your teammates to follow you. And it's very clear to me, or it seems clear to me, that this is a team of 5 guys that each have a different idea of how the game should be played. Maybe the bot lane in particular with Reckless down there. He's had very specific play styles nearly his entire career with teams built around him. And they need to unite around a banner or else this thing is going to fall apart. The meta will help, like crit ADCs will help Reckless, but at the end of the day, they need to play better as a 5-man unit, or else this thing is not going anywhere. So, Broxa, I hear you out. I think you're right, but, it's time for you to step up and become that player, that guy that can lead this team and get them all on the same page. Anyway, that is my LEC mid-split roundup. As always, give me a follow on Twitter at ZingTheLeague. Give the podcast a follow at NoFFs Pod, and we will see you next time.